Welcome to part 2 of a supplemental episode of What a Hell of a Way to Dad. This episode continues Sam Asumadu's interview with Tom Fowler on the topic of the Spycops inquiry and the degree to which the British state has attempted to scuttle any and all social justice protests, while at the same time ensuring the far right has a free pass. If you missed part 1, check the notes to this episode and you'll find a link to the first installment.
And then were they, when it happened, spread across the country or just in London or where?
Yeah, all over the country. Initially, like I said, it was 8 women in that group and now it's 60.
Yeah. What sort of groups were they in that were infiltrated?
It goes to the same. There's over 1,000 groups infiltrated by the undercover units. They're almost exclusively left-wing progressive, environmentalism, anti-racism, human rights, women's rights.
Yeah, those really evil groups trying to bring down the country.
What we've really found is there's a real lack of reporting on the far right. We heard about one officer who infiltrated the BNP last week, HN 56. And it was fucking pathetic. He infiltrated for 10 months. He gave one report at the start of his deployment. He didn't then report then for another 4 months. He just did incredibly little. He was absolutely petrified the entire time. He was worried that fellow undercover officers were going to out him because, essentially, he didn't say this, but you get the impression that and as we know from previous investigations that happened in the past, that there's a sympathy for the far right within the British police and within special branch particularly. We heard from undercover officers that were tasked with infiltrating anti-racist groups in the 1970s who said the National Front weren't a problem. They cooperated with the police. It was only because they were getting attacked by lefties. Police really refused to make a connection between the racist murders that were happening and the growth of the far right. So, for example, when we looked at the Welling, the BNP HQ that used to be in Welling in the late, it was set up there in 89. And there was a big protest against it in 93 that's which the police absolutely battered everybody who went to. They, there was more police horses there than Orgreave, and they did police horse charges into people sitting in the road. Described as a medieval battlefield by people who were there. But the area around the BNP HQ, that's where Stephen Lawrence was killed. That's where there was a number of racist murders in that area. I'm not using the names because I might get it wrong because there's so many names you kind of end up, you know what I mean? But
it's the real names, the fake names, yeah, right.
Yeah. But there was a feeling that because the far right believed in the Queen. That sounds insane, right? But we heard a lot from a lot of undercover officers talking about the protection of the Queen's peace as the highest calling of any police officer. And they just didn't see the far right as a threat to social attitudes in the way in which the far left was and is, right? And you can see the kind of the whole thing about, they talked about public disorder and subversion, but what they're really actually concerned with is social attitudes. They didn't want, we heard from undercover officers during Tranche 1 who, this is a direct quote, there's a lot of long-haired layabouts in need of a good clout. And that's literally how they saw it. Do you know what I mean? They saw the new left of the late 60s and the social attitudes that went with it. One of the earliest groups to be infiltrated was the Women's Liberation Front. Their demands were things like, ban rape in marriage, allow women to have bank accounts, that children born out of wedlock should have the same legal rights as those born in wedlock. Incredibly minor things. Sometimes we forget how far this country's come on some really basic stuff. Rape in marriage was only made illegal in 1990. It was 1974 before a woman could open a bank account in the UK. It simply wasn't possible for a woman to get a mortgage before that. These kind of social attitudes, these changes in social attitudes, which were happening and were real, you can see the SDS as part of a rearguard action against all those, slowing them down from happening in any sort of sensible pace. It's the way in which Britain really has kind of lagged behind the views of its population. There's lots of ways that they do this.
The state has lagged behind, do you mean? The permanent state?
The state lags behind the views of the population of the country, yeah, absolutely.
And do you think there's a difference between the permanent state, as in SDF, blah, blah, and the governments that come in?
Yeah, whoever government is in power, it's the Tory state, right? Do you know what I mean? It's the aristocracy owns this country. We just live here.
Okay, there's two things I wanted to pick up on what you just said earlier. One, you said there was one person who has given evidence who did infiltrate the BNP for 10 months, etc. You also said there was 1,000 groups that were infiltrated. So are you saying there was only one far-right group that was infiltrated out of all of their deployments?
So, that's all we've heard of so far. Now, there is a number of undercover officers who have got such a high level of anonymity. We don't have their cover names, we don't have their real names, and we don't have a cipher for them. There's a lot of bullshit being put out by the inquiry about how dangerous their deployments were, and it's sort of inferred that these were officers who were infiltrating the far right, but we don't have any details about that. We don't know if that was them infiltrating the far right proper, or like some aspect of it, or something unrelated, or they infiltrating the anti-fascist groups. Because we heard also about another officer in the 70s who infiltrated a left-wing party, the Workers' Revolutionary Party. And whilst he was infiltrated doing that, they were doing a lot of anti-fascist work, and they got him to go undercover into the far right. So he was like an undercover officer in the left, pretending to be a left-wing activist, pretending to be a right-wing activist to report back to. So I mean, we get examples like that happen, and we know that the role of Searchlight in infiltrating the far right has been significant in the past.
Explain what Searchlight is, please.
Searchlight is an anti-fascist magazine set up by a man called Jerry Gable. Actually, maybe predated him, but he ran it for the longest time. And they've got very, very close links with the security services. They send their activists undercover into far-right groups. There's a lot about them that's really dodgy. It's not an area I'm that much of a specialist on. But the point I'm making is that there was obviously some monitoring of the far-right that took place, but we have no evidence beyond this one officer for the role that the SDS took in that.
But generally, you've got a lot of evidence on the left-wing groups that were infiltrated. Huge amounts. So, there's
from
that's suspicious. Basically, you're suspicious of that.
But no, I mean, it feeds into certainly when we talk about like the really big fascist mobilizations of the 1970s, like Southall, places like that. Where Blair Peach was murdered, the Red Lion Square where Kevin Gately was murdered. That these are incidents that there was no undercover police officers in the far right. But there were significant numbers in the far left. Right? So.
Okay, can I ask, so a lot of, you said these undercover cops, they were going in, so it's, boots on the ground. Was there any technology involved? Is there any phone tapping or, the things that are...
Undoubtedly, all those things are part of what the British state does. Theoretically, the police are governed by more of the law than the security services. So it would take a warrant to tap someone's phone, historically, whereas it would take the oversight of one senior officer to deploy an undercover officer into someone's life. So particularly for the early years of the unit, it's the human infiltration, the covert human intelligence source, which is used willy-nilly, really, whereas it would take a lot more paperwork to do things like wiretapping. Obviously, that changes.
Who loves... Everybody hates paperwork. Why would you want to do that?
Yeah. Obviously, that changed massively in the modern era. And, when you start looking into this stuff, you start being really, I used to be very quick to make suggestions for how things are done now. I'm more wary of doing that now because the more you know about the past, the less you want to speculate. But we certainly live in an era of neoliberal policing where, the use of private firms to do police work is commonplace. The use of informers for criminal cases the National Informer Database has exploded over the last couple of decades. And the use of electronic covert surveillance is everywhere, right? So, obviously that has changed massively. But when we talk about the historic period, it really is human beings.
Yeah. So there's two BBC articles from 2013. The first one is called, the title is MI5 Spy Unhappy with Ex's Calls. I'll read you a little bit of it. So an MI5 spy just to give you the date. So MI5 spy unhappy with ex's calls, 28th of June 2013. An MI5 spy accused of assaulting his fellow spy ex-girlfriend went to another phone to call her at work when she ignored him, a jury has heard. The woman, referred to by her MI5 PIN number 2363, then answered the call but became uncomfortable, Southwark Crown Court heard. The defendant, using false name Mark Barton for security reasons, denies 2 assaults counts and 1 of harassment. A sexual assault charge was dropped during the trial. So just a little bit more. So a former line manager of the woman, who was a spy as well, told the court that a few weeks before the woman complained to police about Mr. Barton's behaviour, at the end of August 2011, he was aware of an occasion when 2363 took a telephone call that she was uncomfortable with taking. Earlier this week, the court heard that Mr. Barton was out of control after 2363 left him. She said that after following her from a work party, Mr. Barton had lifted her off the tube in a bear hug and forced her to return to his flat. and Mr. Barton had wanted to discuss their relationship and did not accept the romance was over. The woman said she tried to leave, but Mr. Barton physically restrained her, throwing her into a cupboard. And the trial was going to continue the next Monday. That's the first article. Now, I don't know. Do you know of about any spy on spy like abuse like that? Is that something that's come out?
I mean, it's not something I know that much about. There have been a number of cases of MI5 agents behaving appallingly. There's been a number of cases. I'm not sure if this is the same one as there's another one which was I think more recent than that of an MI5 officer who was sexually abusing his partner.
We'll go on to that in a minute. Yeah.
I mean, it's. I would say like the SDS, though they are spies, they are cops. These are police officers. They're not special agents. They haven't had anything like that kind of training. They come from a very different background. They're not allowed to kill people like MI5 officers are. They are allowed to arrest people though, which MI5 officers aren't. There is a much bigger scandal. There's a much bigger scandal than all of this that like relates to the way in which men treat women, right? I mean, we live in a deeply misogynistic society, patriarchy, which men feel they have a right to women's bodies, and that manifests itself in a multitude of ways. And surprisingly enough, people who are given the license to break society's norms in the name of the state abuse that to abuse people, particularly when there's no oversight. And there was no oversight with these cases, and there's very little oversight of MI5. Yeah. So, I'm sure there is like a multitude of cases like that.
Yeah. I mean, something you said just made me think of something that I've been doing recently, because I found that on Twitter that I get like every day there's some sort of court case or tribunal or something of a police who have committed some crime. And it could be any police one. It's not just the Met. It's not even just Greater Manchester Police. All over the shop, they're getting convicted of rape, of drug dealing, of abuse. It's actually, and thieving of dead people. It's mad. So I created this hashtag, like Police Crime Daily. Obviously, I wasn't online yesterday. I wasn't able to update it, but I'm sure there was more cases that came out yesterday because it's every single day.
And it's tip of the iceberg, right? Because the vast majority of police officers don't get held to account for their crimes. Yeah, it's endemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll just go on to the other article. I think it may be about the same case and the reporting of it. So this one is in July 2013. MI5 spy, assault and harassment claims total nonsense. So the MI5 spy has dismissed as total nonsense allegations that he harassed and assaulted his former girlfriend. At London Southwark Crown Court, the defendant, who is using a false name for security reasons, of course, told the jury that he did not think his ex-girlfriend had ever been frightened of him. Mark Barton denies 2 assaults and 1 of harassment against the woman. A charge of a sexual assault against Mr. Barton has been dropped. During cross-examination, the prosecutor, Alison Morgan, asked Mr. Barton if he had ever been violent towards his ex-girlfriend, referred to in court only as 2363, and he said, that's a ridiculous suggestion, that's absolutely total nonsense, I've never been physically aggressive to her in my life. Asked if she'd been scared of him, he said there's absolutely no way she was frightened whatsoever. You wonder how it got to court if she wasn't frightened. But anyway, so then asked if he told 2363's mother that the couple would be married in 2 years. Mr. Barton told the court, I did not say we would be married in 2 years, but I made it very clear that I was very committed to her. It goes on like that. I can't actually get to where if he was convicted or not, which is a shame. They seem to have stopped reporting on it after a while. That's not too great, is it? Let me see.
No, it's horrific. There's a series, To Catch a Copper. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like a fairly recent series. And essentially, it's one of those ones where they use police footage. The police have cooperated with it, where they show police footage of police abusing their position, and then the investigation into them, and then they all get off.
A happy ending for them.
Yeah,
right?
The police never get held responsible for what they've done,
So what do you think the outcome of, it's been 9 years for a short period. What do you see, how long do you think this is going to take to do all 6 tranches, and what accountability will there be after this?
Okay, so I'll answer the second one part first. Absolutely none whatsoever. there's no question of anybody getting any responsibility, any blame being pinned onto anybody. The police will go away completely scot-free for all their crimes. There's no question,
including the bosses.
Absolutely, yes. The point of the inquiry is not to do that. It's purely to learn the lessons. There'll be a bunch of recommendations that will come out of it. That'll be it. In terms of when it reports, the last government demanded it be finished by October 2026. Totally unreasonable, totally unlikely that would happen. The inquiry intends to speed up its process to try and be finished by then. It means that we're just rushing through the important detail of the inquiry whilst we spent so many years faffing around, appeasing police fears about anonymity.
Mm-hmm. And what is the last, where does it go up to? Is it 2010 or 2014? 2000. Yeah. Okay, so,
exposure of Kennedy, basically.
Yeah. Basically, I wanted to ask you about some specific things just to end us off, because my interest in this is actually personal as well. I mean, I'm a journalist, but I've also been an activist in the past. And something came up on my Twitter a little while ago. It's Bat Murphy, who are a team of lawyers.
I know, yeah.
They wrote in a statement at today's undercover police inquiry, hearing the Met has apologised unreservedly for undercover officers spying on family campaigns and community organisations seeking justice, and in particular to members of Black and Asian communities seeking to hold the Met to account. And so I asked, just in general, where do we find a list of which groups and people they were surveilling? Because I had weird things happen to me over the years from 2013 onwards. I'm quite a paranoid person. I used to be a foreign correspondent. I covered. I was in Congo, and I was followed by mining companies specifically because of work that I was doing there. It was about blood minerals. So somebody replied to me, and they gave me. They sent a list. Say the current list of 246 core participants is on the UCPI website at undercover policing. And so I looked at it and I replied again, wow, there's a guy I used to go out with for a few months on there, which was quite shocking to me. No, not shocking, because he's a journalist. He's a good, he's an activist journalist. He does some really great work on Israel and Palestine, and he's done that for years. I'm not going to identify him or at all. And it was a short, short relationship, not really, whatever. It's fine. And so this other person, this friend of mine, replied to me saying, so if you were in fact of a close relationship with someone who were themselves under SDS, MPOIU surveillance, I would expect you to have been subject to a background check at minimum. But in and of itself, that would not qualify you for inquiry participant status. Can you comment on that? Is that something, because the relationship I had was after 2010, so...
Yeah, sure. I mean, after 2010, the person you're talking about is a core participant because they were spied on. A lot of people who were directly named in a lot of the documents have been refused core participant status. So the core participant is quite a high bar, it would appear, to become a core participant. Yeah, it only relates to stuff before 2010. In terms of what the security services and special branch have been up to when it comes to monitoring of activists since then, we don't know, and we're unlikely to find out. We certainly won't find out through this process. We need some other sort of process for that. But yeah, there's a huge number of people who were what they call collateral intrusion into their lives, who are simply being disregarded by the inquiry and any of these processes in terms of the effect that it had on them.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm still. I have a little worry about this, and I'll tell you why. The person told me that a lot of these SDS officers from the 68 to 72 period are dead. So that, not that they were going to be accountable at all, but they can't even participate or can't be exposed. That is
Or abroad. If they're abroad, they don't have to give evidence. So a lot of people have moved abroad. When the inquiry started, they lived in the UK, and they thought, actually, do you know what? I'm going to move abroad.
Oh, really? Good timing, huh? Okay. Well, interesting. Well, so
in one case, HN 109 says he'll kill himself if he's called to give evidence. So the inquiry hasn't called him to give evidence.
Oh,
it'd be interesting to see how many other former undercover officers try that technique as a method of not giving evidence themselves.
Yeah. Well, you alluded to it. We don't know, and the inquiry won't cover what's happened since 2010, but I'll tell you a little story. So I was in in 2022, I ran an organisation called Media Diversified, and we'd done campaigns over years. We'd closed down, but I sort of opened it up again because of the Nationality and Borders Bill, which is obviously under the aegis of, at that time, Priti Patel. She sponsored that bill. Actually, before I go into that, you said that it was about social attitudes. Was there any actual legislation that they were trying to uphold? Like, we've got the Public Order Act now. What did they have in the 70s? Was there anything official?
I mean, sure. Criminal Justice Acts and Public Order Acts are a hallmark of British governments. They come out every couple of years. There were numerous bits of legislation all through the 70s. The SDS were not managed through any piece of legislation. The closest thing was RIPA, the Regulatory Investigative Powers Act, which was released in the early 2000s, which gave a certain sort of framework. More recently, the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Bill, the CHIS Bill, legalises basically anything. You can rape and murder as an undercover officer, and it's perfectly okay, perfectly legal.
When did that bill become an act?
That's an act, yeah.
Since when?
That's an act for a few years. I want to say like 2020, maybe 2019, somewhere around there.
Right,
when the inquiry was ongoing before the inquiry had reported anything.
Okay.
And I mean, if you look at like kind of the mood music, like that Lord Wolney report, I mean, they're demanding, higher levels of infiltration of groups again. But yeah, in terms of legislative framework, there was none for the majority of the history of the SDS.
Okay. And is that CHIS Act, is that still in effect? It's always...
Yeah, very much. Yeah. I mean, it had the support of the Labour Party. Keir Starmer said it was just formalising what already happens anyway.
Yeah, that's something. That's a theme of what I found. The work is going on. The boots are on the ground. It's just legislation catching up with what actual policy is on the ground. But yeah, so I'll just explain. So 2022, Nationality and Borders Bill was announced, and my organisation, myself, we sort of got together with about 22 other organisations to try and oppose it. And so those organisations included like the Muslim Association Board, the Sikh Association, the UK BLM, Bail for Detention Immigration, Migrants Organise. There was lots of us. We all got on a Zoom, which I held, and we organised and said, what should we do about this? Because this affects basically everybody who doesn't have two white parents for the last 3 generations. So that's all of us. We're affected by it. Obviously, I mean, as things developed, we found that this government, the former government and the former government before them, so Labour and Tories, had been making people stateless anyway. For some time. Again, it was just legislation catching up, and it was Priti Patel who proposed it. And so we opposed it in various ways. We did online talks, we did in-person protests at Downing Street, outside the House of Lords. We made a noise. And at some point, I decided that I needed to move on and do some other stuff because I felt a little bit uncomfortable. I thought we had been infiltrated. Now, I got further proof of that from somebody who stayed with the group, who just called me up one day. Somebody's accused me of being a spy or whatever. I've known her for years, and I know she absolutely isn't this brilliant Muslim woman and so on. And I said, yeah, that's messy. What's going on? And so because I had brought in this person who was accusing my friend of being a spy, I thought, right, let me ring her and find out. Because what actually happened is it goes back even further than that. In about early 2010s, I was in, I was part of lots of anti-imperialist friend groups and actual groups and so on. And at some point I got involved in a group called Hands Off Somalia. Now, I'd come from Uganda. I'd lived in Uganda as a foreign correspondent and journalist and filmmaker. And Somalia is something that was very close. And, whilst I was in Uganda, there was terrorist bombings by Al-Shabaab. And so, I had some connection to Somalia through that because I had to cover it for CNN at the time. But anyway, I got in this bit because it was like imperialist nonsense about Somalia and all this. There was a lot of, I was a bit younger then and interested in all these things, all these thinking, the theoretical, but also on the ground, the people that are hurt, the drones on Somalia and all that. So there was this campaign that was brought together, Hands Off Somalia. And so I met a certain person then She was a person who talked, again, I'm not going to identify her, but she, got on panels, talked about it, was at the protest. I can't find a picture of this person anywhere. But there's other pictures of other people who got involved, because lots of people did, and including myself. And then I didn't think about it. I sort of moved out of the space. I organised got my own organisation, started publishing writers and so on. I hadn't thought about this person for a long time, but I ended up writing an article for Open Democracy saying we should all join forces to oppose the Nationality Borders Bill. And then a few days later, we'd already, by this point, we were all together. There's loads of us, not just the organisations, all the members of those thousands. We had a petition that was, when I found this petition, it was at 2,000 and something signatures. Somebody had written it, just really well written, opposing it. I still don't know who that person is to today, but we got it over 200,000 signatures over a few weeks, yeah? I went on the radio and all this. Anyway, after I'd written this Open Democracy article, I get a call saying, hey, Sam, how are you doing? I was like, oh my God. I won't say her name. I said, have you read? She said, yeah, I read your piece in Open Democracy. I really want to get involved. I was like, of course, because I remember her as being really, militant, activist, all that. I was like, yeah, of course, come to the next Zoom meeting, come to the protest we're doing. She turns up, ingratiates herself with all these, leaders of these groups and stuff. And then, I've left this group to do other journalism on IPPs. And they've stayed in it, but we're all in a DM group together and so on. And so after my friend has told me this person has called her a spy, and I'm calling her, what are you doing? What's going on? And we sorted it out. It seemed fine. Then she brought in another friend with her to the next protest, who I didn't know. And I mean, I'm gonna. So I sat down in a cafe. This is now an extra guy who's joined in, who keeps going about how he was arrested at a protest before. He said, yeah, violence, and, do you think we should do this and that? We're all like looking at him. What's he on about? We're not violent people. But most of us were in our 40s doing whatever. And this guy is saying this. So he sat in a cafe with me and these two people, one who I'd seen 10 years ago, hadn't seen them for ages, her friend, who she's brought in, and this guy who just appeared, bought a Twitter account, somehow he was involved with us. He says, oh yeah, don't you think it's the royal family that are at fault for all this? And I was like thinking, this is dodgy. So I said, no, you know what? My mum loved the royal family. We watched we watched the wedding together, the last one, Meghan and Harry, and she's like, all right, fine. And then he decided to ask me about Boris Johnson had a best friend. Boris Johnson's wife, Carrie, had a best friend who's an activist. She does activism within FGM, so female genital mutilation. Something I've known for years. I don't know her well, but then he started to ask me about her. What do you think of her? And this and that. I was like, yeah, she's fine. I haven't seen her for a while, because my antennae is going off. Like, what is going on? Eventually, he leaves. And I'm like, girls, this is so dodgy. This is before I knew, the spy stuff that I've been called and whatever. That guy is dodgy. I take them out of the cafe and I said, can you turn your phones off, please? They're like, what? I said, please turn your phones off. And one was like, I haven't turned it off for ages. I said, just turn your phones off. And then I explained that I think that guy is I think he's an informer or a spy. Well, I don't know what's going on. Little did I know that these women may actually have been the people, because then this DM thing, they had this whole DM group. And one day, the extra woman who I hadn't known, the one who'd been brought in by this woman, says, hey, what's going on in this group? I've just seen screenshots of something I wrote in here in a public face. Well, you've copied it. There's a spy in here. I'm like, what is going on? Blah, blah. And everything collapsed from then.
There are lots of bad faith actors in all these things. As well as undercover officers, there's like informers, infiltrators, there's grasses. There's a whole corporate world of infiltration that doesn't come from the state. One of the big roles of all this intelligence gathering is what they call vetting, what we would refer to as blacklisting. So, the idea that someone would be sent out to kind of update the vetting of somebody by questioning people who are associated with them sounds perfectly believable sort of thing that would happen. I don't know anything about this particular case, but
I've cut off these people. I'm not going to name them. I don't want any trouble, but they did ruin that. I would say it's down to those two women at least. The organising stopped.
I mean, on top of that, there is a lot of people in activism who are fucking funny types, funny fish, and there's plenty of ways in which groups get destroyed by the internal dynamics of it. I would say that in my personal experience, the people who did that were they were encouraged, and the blames were fanned by undercover officers who nobody thought were doing things like that. But then you look back at it and you saw the way in which they lifted up the voices of those who were. There's a role within that as well. Disrupting, undermining, and destroying groups was a big part of what their deployment was about, right? It wasn't just about intelligence gathering.
Yeah, I mean,
the whole sector of the state, it's about undermining and destroying groups.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the guy who got to the top of his organisation and called off.
Rick Gibson with the Troops Out movement. Yeah, I mean, he really pioneered the whole way of using sex as a way in which of bringing people on side. He had sex with a number of women in the groups that he was infiltrating, which led to the groups he was in, supporting his candidacy to be the regional organiser and the national organiser for the Troops Out movement in the mid-1970s. Yeah, that seemed to be a bit of a blueprint then for later officers who use sexual relationships as a primary method, not just to building their legend, but getting access to privileged information.
Mm-hmm. And so, their handlers, would their handlers be near? Are these, what does the handler do?
Yeah, I mean, so much of these roles are informal, so there's not some rule about how many meters away they have to be at all times, but certainly they were kept in close contact. What we know from Kate Wilson's case at the IPT is that Mark Kennedy was communicating with his handler every couple of minutes. He was sending him text messages, for making phone calls. He was in constant relaying information constantly, really, about both his professional deployment and his personal life, which really massively overlapped throughout the whole time period.
Mm-hmm. So just to end off, what is the one thing you want the public to know? Because there's been a bit of reporting. I've seen some in The Guardian. Your Twitter feed is like my Bible to go for when I want, daily updates. I just click on your profile and have a read and know what's going on. And so, but not everybody's following you on Twitter. Let's say two questions. What do you think of the reporting so far from the mainstream press on this?
So, I mean, the problem is that we've got a very tabloid influence media in the UK. The sex angle has dominated the majority of the reporting. Certainly, I think a lot of editors, when presented with new information about this case, go, "We covered that sex story 10 years ago." I think there's a willful ignoring of the democratic angle, the suppression of dissent in general. It's seen as human interest. I mean, that's not to downplay the human interest element at all. Do you know what I mean? The lives were destroyed, personal relationships were damaged beyond repair. I'm somebody whose personal life was completely destroyed by this. I don't downplay any of that at all. There's a much bigger story about, like I said at the beginning, it affects all of us. It's not just about those of us who were directly impacted. And that's a story that doesn't really get told very much. If it does get mentioned in passing, it's certainly something which campaigners forefront, particularly police fighters out of lives forefront that element to it, as well as the institutional sexism. Yeah, the coverage is very limited. Frustratingly so, given that police corruption is such a popular topic in Britain today for fiction and stuff. Do you know what I mean?
God, yeah. Line of Duty is one of the most popular shows that the BBC has ever done.
Yeah, and that was being aired at the same time as Tranche 1 hearings. So, we were sat in court all day talking about real police corruption, and in the evenings everybody was on about this fictional police corruption, and they weren't interested in the real stuff, which was kind of weird,
Yeah. So you don't really rate the mainstream press coverage.
Strangely enough.
Yeah. Where would you direct people to get more information or to go, to find out about this?
So, I would say, literally just look up the hashtag Spycops on, Twitter's the best one, but any social media will direct you to places. If you go to the website spycops.info, it links to all the various campaign groups and research groups that are working on this. Mm-hmm. You can check out my podcast, Spycops Info Podcast. We do very infrequent episodes with deep dives on particular individual topics. The problem with this is that, it's a tsunami of detail. Now, once you get past the initial kind of story about what these units were and what they did vaguely, then you just get into this quagmire of detail, which I think for those of us who were really engaged with it, kind of we were swimming in all this tiny detail, which we're trying to piece together and You learn a lot from, like, sometimes we have a little piece of information and it doesn't make any sense for a couple of years, and then something else comes out and then it makes sense. There's a lot of that sort of thing, which I think for a casual observer is never going to engage with it on that level. So as we're doing that, I think we don't necessarily present a particularly compelling narrative because we're doing that at the same time as we're trying to present a narrative. So that's part of the problem with reporting on it.
Okay, well, to me, it sounds like you should definitely write a book about this. I hope you do. I hope you keep doing interviews. I'd like to see you on the actual BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and all of those, saying what you've said to me. But so just lastly, if you tell people what is your Twitter handle, where they can find you, there's a podcast.
Yeah, sure. Easiest place to find me is on Twitter, at Tom B. Fowler. Yeah, I'm on the social media as well, all the same thing. But just go to spycops.info, you'll find everything you need to know there, really.
Thank you so much, Tom. I just really appreciate you taking the time for this. Yeah, thank you for doing the work that maybe some other journalists should be doing as well.
Thanks so much again for listening to this series. And please check the show notes for info on where you can find more of Sam and Tom's work.